Welcome to the Advanced Hobby Lab. Today I'm going to try my hand at finishing a 3D print. For this task I've chosen the Noble Charmander. I found a STL for Charmander on printables.com. I'm going to print him off on my FDM 3D printer. Then I'm going to sand him down, apply a primer coat, a couple coats of acrylic, and then finish him off with a clear coat. So to make my task a little bit easier, I've designed this print drying stand. So it's a simple stand that's designed to mount a wooden dowel like so. You can then mount a 3D printed part on the end here so that you can manipulate your part, turn it around, look at it, and paint it without getting your fingers all on the paint job. This also comes with interchangeable modules, so you can take out the insert and add an insert with a wider diameter if you have a larger dowel. So the links for these are in the description below. Let's get started. Here's the part fresh off the 3D printer. I use the organic structure option in Prusa Slicer to generate the supports. You can see some stringing throughout the print, though I'm not too worried because these strings are fairly small and should be easy to remove with a little bit of sanding. I removed the support structures, which came off fairly easily. Unfortunately, so did the tail. While removing the support structures, I accidentally popped off the tail. I could try reprinting the whole thing and hopefully keep the tail intact, but I think instead I'm just going to try to glue on the tail later. Okay, it's time to start sanding down the model. Now I'm going to use two different grits of sandpaper. I'm going to start with a 120 grit and then move to a 240 grit. Lower grit sandpapers tend to be better at getting rid of the more significant imperfections on the model. You can see areas such as the inside of his mouth or the underside of his belly didn't print quite so smoothly because of a steep overhang. The 120 grit sandpaper will be good at smoothing these areas out. I can then move up to the 240 grit sandpaper, which is good at getting rid of any of the smaller imperfections such as layer lines or any deep gashes left by the lower grit sandpaper. I don't see a need to go to a higher grit sandpaper because we're going to apply a primer coat next. The primer is going to fill in a lot of the smallest imperfections on the model, so you don't have to worry about the rough texture left by the 240 grit sandpaper. That's going to be covered up by the primer coat. Sanding can be one of the most time-consuming aspects of the finishing process. It's incredibly important in order to get a good quality finish. However, it can still be very tedious and very exhausting. With a part like this, it can be hard to get the sandpaper into all the little nooks and crannies. You can see areas like underneath his arms or around his legs. I might not be able to get all the layer lines removed. Perhaps it might be better to use a tool such as a metal file that might be able to get into the tighter spaces. Finally, I need to finish sanding the tail flame, which is very difficult because it's such a small piece. Here we have the finished sanded part. For the most part, it looks pretty good. You do see a lot of layer lines around his more concave areas, such as underneath his arms, around his legs, the inside of his mouth. I also managed to glue on his tail, which with any luck should hopefully stay on this time. You do see a rough texture where I sanded, which isn't going to be a problem after we apply the primer coat. I moved to the backyard so I can apply the primer coat in a well-ventilated area. And sorry about the visuals. It's really bright outside and my camera is still adjusted for indoor filming. I mounted the Charmander onto a 1/8 inch wooden dowel using a little bit of mounting putty so that I can get a more thorough coat of paint. I mounted one of my drying stands to the inside of a cardboard box using some blue painter's tape so that I have a place to put the Charmander when I'm finished painting it. It is important to get an even coat on the part by using a back and forth motion with the spray can. This becomes easier with a wooden dowel as I can spin in my fingers to get all the way around the part. Here's the results of our primer coat. As you can see, there are still a few layer lines that are visible. There's also a new rough texture that's been added from the primer. We're going to do some light sanding next in order to give it a smooth surface finish. I'm going to lightly sand the part using 400 grit sandpaper. The purpose of sanding is just to give it a smooth surface texture. So that's why I'm using a higher grit sandpaper. It's important to note that the primer coat can be very soft and very thin. So it's important to use a light touch while sanding so that you don't sand through the primer coat. The part is now sanded smooth and ready for acrylic paint. You can see a few areas like over his brow and on his belly where I may have sanded for just a little bit too long, because you start to see the original gray PLA color come through. It's time to start applying the first coat of acrylic paint. I'm going to start by painting with a fairly wide brush to fill in all his red areas. I'm going to try to avoid areas like his belly, the inside of his mouth, around his eyes, and his tail flame because I'm going to use a different color for those. I mixed in a little yellow with the red in order to create the color for his belly. In order to get the smaller, more intricate areas such as inside his mouth or around his eyes, I'm switching to a much finer tip brush. I want to spend a little time just touching up a few minor areas before I let the first coat dry. The smaller brush is great for doing touch-ups. I need to let the paint dry for about an hour, and here's the result. So it doesn't look too bad for an inexperienced painter such as myself. The paint job is a little bit blotchy and uneven in areas, which is fine for just a first coat. We can fix it up in the second one. I didn't spend too much time trying to add detail, such as the tail flame is only yellow at this point. I figured we can fix that in the second coat. I also had a hard time with the inside of the mouth, as the black that I tried to use for the top of the mouth bled onto his tongue. I would like to try to fix that too. It's time for the second coat. I've reviewed my reference image, and it looks like my colors might have been a little bit off. The color I used for his skin was way too dark. The paint I was using labels this red as candy apple red, and I really needed something closer to orange. To accomplish this, I mixed a little yellow in with the red, and for his belly color, I mixed a little red in with the yellow. I still think it might be a little bit too dark, but I kind of like this shade. For the second coat, I'm going to try to use the smaller brush a bit more, so I can get more precise detail. I want to try to add better defined color transitions, especially like areas around his belly and his eyes. After reviewing the reference image, I discovered I used the wrong color for his eyes. I'm going to try to fix that now. I'm going to try finishing up his flame tail by adding some soft brush strokes of red onto his yellow flame. His eyes still need a tiny dot of white with a dash of blue. I also can't forget painting his toenails and his teeth. With a little bit of blue, his eyes will be finished. This is a good time to try to fix up his tongue. The last step is to apply a clear coat. This process is done just like applying the primer, except with the added challenge that you can't actually see if you got full coverage with a clear coat. This process should make the part more durable and UV resistant. Here's the finished Charmander, and it turned out better than I expected. I still think the skin might be a little bit too dark, but I kind of like the dark red Charmander. I also think the flames in his tail look fantastic. There's still a few layer lines you can see, like around his shoulder blades, but overall, he looks pretty good. I think the fine detail around his eyes and his teeth turned out quite well. They could be a little bit better, a little bit sharper, and that's something I feel like I could probably get better with practice. So I think this project turned out pretty well. I was really happy with it. I especially enjoyed the painting technique using these wooden dowels. I thought that made painting a lot easier. I see no finger smudges at all on my print, so I'm very happy with it. The one downside with this printing technique is that it does leave a single spot on the underside that's unpainted. Now that's not a huge problem, because I'm going to leave my Charmander just laying down on a desk anyway, so no one's ever going to see it. But if I really wanted to, I could probably just hand paint this one small section. I am clearly a very inexperienced painter. I'm not claiming I'm an expert in this field at all. If you know of any techniques I should have used instead, please leave a comment down below. If you thought this content was helpful or entertaining, please give me a like. And if you want to see future content like this, please be sure to subscribe. And thanks for watching.